So I think there are two really fundamental issues. Most UK citizens think war is something they outsource to their armed forces, or it only happens to other countries. And in the world we live in, they could not be more wrong. So they're not psychologically prepared for the country to be attacked. And the brutal point is, if you look at what's happened to cities like Kyiv in Ukraine, then in military capability terms, that could happen here. That's the frame we need to think about. But the more difficult aspect of this is that in order to get the armed forces and civil society ready to deter, remember, we want to deter, we don't want to fight, but to get ready, we're going to have to spend more money on defence soon. And the government has been wrestling with this for a year. So that means each one of us has got to agree that unless we want to pay more taxes or borrow more money, we're going to have less of something else that we like, probably in welfare, in order to put more money into our defence sooner. And that's unattractive, but essential.
Well, so what do you say to people who say we just can't afford to spend more on defence?
So it's not a question of affordability. The UK spends £1.3 trillion a year on us, on ourselves. That's our
That's the total public sector bill.
That's the total public sector bill. £1.3 trillion. Defence is about £67 billion of that. We spend more than 100 billion on debt interest. We spend way more than 300 billion on things like welfare. So it's not a question of do we have the money? The question is, can we make some very hard choices to move our money about before something terrible happens?
And so cutting welfare is the suggestion you're sort of floating there. I mean, we spend 5 times on the welfare budget what we're spending on defence. But is there a justification for that, given, you know, we have an ageing population, the state pension, other pensioner support is the largest proportion of welfare spending by far? I mean, you can't cut that so easily, can you? So
we're going to have to either tax more or borrow more or make different choices. So it seems more likely than not there are some aspects of the overall welfare offer that we make ourselves that could be trimmed. But
trimmed is a polite way of putting it. I mean, it's got to be more than that, hasn't it?
So, I mean, probably got to find, I think, about another £10 billion a year from this 1.3 trillion to put defence onto the right footing. But we need to remember that if we don't fix our deterrence, and as a result of that, like Ukraine, we end up fighting, then we'll be spending 50% of our GDP. That's generally the cost of war, plus all the cost in death and destruction and the trauma that spans 3 generations. So
we don't have a choice, really?
So we do have a choice, but the rational choice is to do deterrence properly in order to avoid the risks of fighting. And remember, there's no point worrying about our welfare if the cities are in ashes because we failed to deter.
I mean, the Defence Investment Plan has been long delayed. You know, we were expecting it in September. It's perhaps next month, has been suggested maybe this week. The figure of 18 billion extra over 4 years has been mooted. You were talking about 10 billion a year. So how far short, how much more ambition does the Chancellor, the Prime Minister need to show, in your view? So
I'm not a public servant and I don't know the accurate figure, but the one that is bandied around is over the next 4 years, the gap between the Defence Review outcome and the amount of money that the Treasury wants to provide is about £28 billion over 4 years. And that's a lot of money. And the choice that we've been confronting for a year now is, if you've got to close that gap, do you cut the review, which might be mad in the world we live in now, or do you have to do the hard yards and find more money sooner? And what may happen, I don't know, is perhaps the Treasury finds another £18 billion a year or so, and that will significantly close the gap, but it wouldn't remove the challenge of having to delay or cut something. But
the figure that was briefed was 18 billion over 4 years.
Yes.
So, I mean, that doesn't cut it.
No. So there's going to be a gap. Now, how do you manage that gap? Well, my preference is that the government does what governments have done for 2,000 years and goes to the city in London and says, we now need to bring more private capital in defence. And I think there's a real appetite amongst the city fraternity to do that. They realise it's important. They realise it can be done on a commercial basis, and we need new arrangements. So what I would love to see is the public sector providing more money, let's say it's 18 billion over 4 years, and then immediately the government is walking down the Strand to the city and saying, help us find the balance. And then we will genuinely have a whole of society response to the problems that we face.
So is there a kind of benefit to economic growth, turning the economy, as Emmanuel Macron has put it, into a war economy? Is that something that you think the Prime Minister could sort of sell, whoever that Prime Minister might be, as a kind of growth opportunity?
So it was at the heart of the defence review. The proposition is we need to fix our defence for war in the 21st century. That means transformation. So it's more than drones, but it's a lot about 21st century technology. And the proposition is the UK is good enough and clever enough to do that transformation in a way the rest of the world can admire. And when we do that, that would restore our armed forces' effectiveness in reasonable time, and we would make things and do things that other nations wanted to buy. And so you can draw a line between fixing defence in a transformative way and export-led growth. And the City and the Treasury can both see that.
What would be your message to Keir Starmer, who might not be around as Prime Minister much longer, about the kind of legacy he could leave if he makes difficult decisions on this? So I would prefer not to have a conversation with one person, because I think we're having a conversation not just with a government, but with the whole of society. And the message is quite straightforward. We didn't ask for it, but we live in really troubling times now, and we have to sort our defences out. You can't rely on hope or denial to do that, or rely on our friends to bail us out, or our enemies to leave us alone. So we're going to have to make some hard calls to fix our defence with enough money, quickly enough, and do it well. And then we will all thrive. I mean, Labour's at war with itself. How big a distraction is that when there is this urgency that you've been talking about? So if in the next couple of weeks this government funds its own defence review, I think with a combination of public and private money, then the Ministry of Defence, no matter what else is going in Whitehall, can get on with it. It will still need political and military and official leadership to do it well. But let's create the conditions that whatever happens in our politics, fixing defence happens and happens well and quickly enough. But given a lot of the pressure on the potential successors to Keir Starmer to move the party to the left, how optimistic can you be that whoever comes next will put defence at the heart of spending decisions? Well, I'm encouraged in that those people who may become candidates to be our next Prime Minister all talk up defence. They recognise this, but what they've now got to do, I think, in their campaigns, whoever they are, is start to say exactly what they're going to have less of in order to do defence properly soon enough. So too much talk, not enough actual doing? Well, I think there's some time to go yet, but we need to know as a society what is it we're going to give up or have less of in order to do our defence properly. Given that you were commissioned to write the Defence Review as one of Keir Starmer's first acts as Prime Minister, how disappointed are you that we're still having this conversation all this time later, nearly 2 years after he was elected? So I'm clearly disappointed because we had a cracking start. The review, I think, set out a narrative for war in the 21st century that's as good as anybody's got in the world, and we worked out how it was affordable over 10 years. We then said, but the way this world is going, you're likely to have to move it up. You're going to have to find more money sooner, and my goodness, that has happened. So what we now need to see is the government's own review implemented well and quickly enough, and the next step is find the money to sort the dip out. We've seen, you know, just in the last few hours, really, how fast things move in terms of Iran, for example. Was Keir Starmer right to stay out of Donald Trump's war, largely? So, speaking personally, I could see no legal argument that stood up for us engaging in the sort of war the US and Israel took to Iran. So I support the decision not to engage. And then when UK allies and UK bases were attacked, we're in a different place. And then we need to stand up and protect ourselves. And what that exposed is there's some way to go yet before UK armed forces are once again able to protect our interests as well as our security at home. And when you look at what Donald Trump was saying just today on Iran, you know, he was talking about he was an hour away from striking the country once again. When you're faced with an ally that mercurial, does it, you know, reinforce the argument that some are making that we should draw closer to the EU, even rejoin the EU down the track? Does that, from a defence point of view, does that make sense? So I don't think they're connected. I think the US
and Europe have a common interest, a common advantage in making NATO work. What has clearly got to happen is a rebalancing of effort. This has been clear for 20 years, that Europe cannot rely on the US taxpayer to fund their defence any longer. That's really clear. But a more balanced NATO is important and valuable to the US and important and valuable to Europe. I think the bigger point right this week with the US president talking about striking Iran and in ways that seem unlimited means that we have to contemplate. We've gone back to a world where war is very much alive and kicking, and it has no boundaries or safety net. And when President Trump talks about the Iranians as animals and bombing them back to the Stone Age, this is language we probably last saw in the Second World War, and it reminds us that unless you are able to defend yourself, you are at risk of terrible, terrible destruction.
General Sir Richard Barrons, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was pretty sobering there, talking about the vulnerability of the UK and the idea that, as has happened in Ukraine, that some of our cities could get reduced to ashes if we don't spend more on defence to protect ourselves. And he really threw down the gauntlet to the current Prime Minister and indeed whoever comes next, pointing out that we spend 5 times as much on welfare as we do on defence. And, you know, tough choice there. Cut some of that. Invest in defence was really the message coming from him. But also some optimism that he thinks there is an appetite in the city to invest in defence, and that whoever's in number 10 now or coming next could get some of that money in and spark a bit of growth in the UK as well. So quite a bleak message in many ways, but also just a dose of optimism there. Well, the former Chancellor, Foreign Secretary and Health Secretary Sir Jeremy Hunt and Labour peer Ayesha Hazarika are on the sofa tonight. Sir Jeremy first, it was a pretty sobering message, you know, talk of cities in ashes if we don't spend what we need to protect ourselves. What did you make of it?
I think he's right. And I think everyone knows he's right. And you just have to look at what Putin's done in Ukraine. And then you have to look at countries like Estonia, where they have a city right on the border with Russia called Narva, which many people think is what Putin could go for next. And if he did attack a NATO member, and he would love to dismember NATO if he possibly could, he's always seen it as the arch enemy, then we wouldn't be having a discussion about, you know, 4% or 5% of GDP. We'd be talking about 10% of GDP. And so the real question is, what are you going to do? And that makes me think like a former Chancellor. I very much agree on welfare reform. I know it's very, very difficult for any government, but particularly for the Labour Party. We've seen that. But can I offer one suggestion? Because I think,
It's so collegiate of you.
You know, this is, you know, rather than just talking the abstract about welfare reform, you know, at the moment, one of the ways that you qualify for not having to look for work is if you say you've got moderate anxiety or depression. Now, when I was Health Secretary, those long, long years in which you interviewed me many times, every doctor I met said that if you have anxiety or depression, you need social contact. But signing people onto welfare and off work deprives them of that. Far cheaper would be to expand NHS talking therapies. And
I mean,
go on then.
well, yes. I was being a little bit tongue-in-cheek when I said so collegiate, because I knew there was going to be a sting in the tail of your argument, and there was. How would that go down with Labour, Ayesha, to hear, you know, the way Jeremy's talking about trimming that welfare bill?
Well, I think lots of Labour MPs and peers do want to get the welfare bill down, and they do want more people into work. I mean, Labour, the clue is in the title, and when you look at the number of young people not in educational training, that's not just bad for the economy, that's a personal tragedy for them. If you start your life on benefits, there's a high chance you will stay on benefits, so that's not good for anybody.
Yeah, but the backbenchers haven't got the memo, have they?
Well, I think the way it was presented, you know, was not particularly skillful. The problem was it wasn't presented in a sort of welfare to work plan. It was sort of, it began as that, then it became a Treasury spreadsheet. And Jeremy will well know from his time in government, I think that's actually a lot of consensus from the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, people like Ian Duncan-Smith, right through to people like, you know, Ruth Lister on the Labour side, who would say, we all want to get young people into work. It's not just young people as well. Older people as well feel they are not on the scrap heap of life. They would like to come back to work, maybe more flexible working, that kind of thing. But you can't just pull a lever. It involves investment, as you said, lots of talking therapies, businesses making sure that they're equipped to have people that have not been in the workplace for a long time. It isn't just a simple thing. There's also people, for example, that have things like cancer and other... You can't just force them back to... So this, I think we're all agreed that this is something that we'd like... Do you know what I would like to see? And I wish the government had done this straight away when we came into power. I think they should have set up a proper commission, almost cross-party. I would have invited someone like Ian Duncan-Smith onto it and said, right, how do we deal with this? Because this is an issue. It doesn't suit anybody to have lots of young people not working. The other thing I would look at is the pensions. The triple lock has got to be looked at as well.
Oh, well, you'd agree with that as well. I mean, there's a lot of consensus on this sofa, but there's not consensus in Parliament, is there?
Yes, but I think, look, let's be honest, the way the government tried to do welfare reform was a big mistake. And what Ayesha and I are saying is this is not about taking money away from vulnerable people. It's about giving them a better choice than they currently have. And I think that, you look at the numbers. I mean, Sir Richard Barrons was talking about needing an extra 10 billion a year. If you got the working age welfare bill back to pre-pandemic levels, not that long ago, just 2019 levels in real terms, that's more than 50 billion a year.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that's crazy, the figures we're talking about, isn't it?
Absolutely crazy. Can I just throw one other thing into the mix, which is why I think, whether it's Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves or someone else in Downing Street, they must come back to this because it is also a very big opportunity for the economy. I mean, we have the third largest tech sector in the world after the United States and China. We don't have any British tech giants, which is why we don't talk about it, and that's another story. But we have tremendous strength in tech. And if you look at the original Silicon Valley that was set up in Stanford, that was actually off the back of Department of Defence and NASA funding in the 1950s when the United States was in the space race with the Soviet Union. So this is the way that we could actually turn Britain into the world's next Silicon Valley if we wanted to.
We must come back to this, Jeremy says, but will we?
Well, I just want to broaden the conversation out to some of the points that Richard Barrons was also making about there could be growth opportunities in investing in defence. And I, for example, have spoken to many trade union leaders who say, with some money going into defence, there is actually quite a kind of renaissance happening in terms of really good jobs, defence apprenticeships in the advanced supply, chain, all of that kind of thing. So I think if this is done properly, yes, this is a moment of great peril. And, this isn't some hypothetical conversation about defence challenges 20 years. Those defence challenges are here today. But I think if the government can make a big argument, and it's not just an argument to parliamentarians and to the media, actually it's something to get into schools, into colleges, into workplaces, into communities, in the way that they do in some of the Scandinavian countries. Jeremy, there could actually be some benefits in terms of there's great jobs in defence.
So, Jeremy, when you heard Sir Richard talking about the city and the appetite for investment, you knock about the city a lot now. Is that appetite there? Do you think he's right?
Absolutely, because the city wants a sector where the UK does really well. And one of the silent revolutions, actually, in the last decade has been that all our universities have developed these enormous science parks and business parks. We're getting all these tech spin-outs, these life science spin-outs, and lots of them are relevant to defence. And, I think the trick here, and I think it is something the government it could go badly wrong, let me put it this way, and this is not a party political criticism, but if this extra money, the extra 10 billion a year that Richard Barrons talks about, just goes to the big three defence primes, British Aerospace, Babcock and Rolls, then we won't see the benefit. What we need to do is to make sure that enough of it goes to these small, really innovative startups that are...
Which are all over the country as well.
Which actually John Healey was talking about today. But, I mean, why are we still talking about this? The question I put to Sir Richard, that, the Defence Review was one of the first things that the Prime Minister did when he got into Downing Street. Why has it taken so long? It's a terrible indictment, isn't it? I
wish I knew the answer to that. I mean, look, there's so much pressure now. We had the quite damaging and quite damning intervention from Lord Robertson, who, wrote the Strategic Defence Review. And in that period of time, we have got this kind of gap in the funding. It just needs to be done. And we've seen the Prime Minister announce this new funding. But I also do think it goes back to something I just said a couple of minutes ago. In fact, I had a great interview with one of your colleagues, Annabel Goldie, she's in the Conservative, she's in the House of Lords, she's done a lot of work in defence. We have got to have a really big conversation about defence in this country.
Yeah, and the point he was making about the civilian population isn't resilient enough.
Absolutely.
We sort of assume that war is being outsourced, something you can outsource.
I mean, I went to a big event, funnily enough, in the Northwest all about this, and we were having some of those conversations, and there were people there, not just from the defence sector and these smaller companies, but there were actually people there from kind of the more civil society end of things saying, you can't just sort of impose this on people. You need to explain this to citizens. You need to be explaining this at every level, that we are in really dangerous times, because the public will also need to feel like they have the consent of the public to do this.
Yeah. I think...
we had it too easy for decades.
In some ways that's true, although I think, funnily enough, compared to the populations of most countries in the world, the British public do sort of understand that we have to defend ourselves. But what we haven't done is won the argument for the things that we're going to cut in order to fund defence. So I think the effort is partly about why we need to do defence, but it's mainly about these are the things that we don't need to do. And I think
would that include pensions?
Well, I do think we need to look at the pensions bill. I think it's more difficult because that was a clear manifesto commitment by both parties. Whereas I think the working age welfare bill is something that, is an immediate crisis and really could be done very quickly.
We could carry on talking for the rest of the show about this, but we have other things to cover. And there has been a significant move by the government this evening, who have announced that they're watering down sanctions on Russian diesel and jet fuel imports. These were brought in last year in response to the ongoing Russian war on Ukraine. But the risk of jet fuel shortages appears to have forced a change. Let's bring in our political correspondent, Alex Rogers now. Alex, give us the latest on this.
Yeah, so as you were saying, Cathy, the government is relaxing sanctions on oil originating from Russia that's even been sent to other countries to be refined. The government banned this kind of oil in October because it wanted to apply pressure on Russia over its war in Ukraine. But now what we learn is that there's a licence coming into force tomorrow that will allow this oil to be imported indefinitely, although Peter Kyle, the business secretary, will review that periodically. And it comes, as you say, amid concerns across Europe about the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, and that the disruption caused by the war in Iran may be preventing people from going on holiday and disrupting their flights and disrupting jet fuel supplies. So I think it really shows how global events are hampering what the government wants to do, because before now, the UK government's been pretty strong and strident on its sanctions on Russia, but it's now having to relent a little bit.
Alex, thanks very much for that update.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... Hi, darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
...is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
Well, now, there was another economic blow for the government today as Britain's jobs market showed the first signs of strain from the Iran war. Unemployment jumped unexpectedly while vacancies fell to a 5-year low, and it was young people who bore the brunt of it. Official figures show the unemployment rate nudged up to 5% in the 3 months to March, up from 4.9%. The hardest-hit sectors were the lower-paying ones, such as hospitality and retail, where young people make up the bulk of the workforce, and they saw some of the sharpest jumps. Payroll employment also fell by 100,000 in April alone, though the Office for National Statistics did caution that figures at the start of the new tax year carry greater uncertainty than usual. Well, let's bring in Jeremy and Ayesha, who are sitting on the sofa here. Unemployment rising, I mean, it was pretty unexpected, wasn't it, that rise to 5%, wage growth slowing. This is the Iran war impact hitting home, isn't it, Jeremy?
Yes, I mean, it is that. I think, obviously, the increase in employers' national insurance, which most people think was a mistake, won't have helped. Curiously, there will be some people in number 11 who are, you know, secretly slightly pleased that this will reduce the likelihood of the Bank of England increasing interest rates by as much, because the more the froth looks like it's coming out of the economy, the less the need to increase interest rates. So these things can have slightly unintended consequences. But I think what they really all remind us is that we need a big plan to really get growth back up from 1% a year to the 2.5% a year that we were getting before 2008. And that's the bit which I think is really missing at the moment. And so, you know, in this sense, the Treasury is, you know, desperately happy when you get a little bit of good news and a little bit down when you get a bit of bad news. But actually that bigger plan is what I think people want to see. Yeah,
and Ayesha, it's been missing that plan, hasn't it, ever since the government came in, because growth was the #1 agenda. You know, strip out all the missions and milestones and whatever, it's not happened, has it?
Well, it has been very challenging, and I think, you know, the government would admit that. Obviously, we've now got these geopolitical issues, and to be fair, different governments have been buffeted around by these external forces. But I think, in a way, this actually links back to the conversation we were having earlier in terms of how do you get more people into work? How do you sort of stimulate the economy? That's something that we've been struggling.
Jeremy would say don't increase national insurance.
No, but there's other things as well in terms of investing in skills. You know, there was a story in the Times this weekend saying that there's a lot of people who are wanting to get into trades, right? We have got a shortage of construction workers, electricians, plumbers. They can't, the waiting lists for people going to colleges to get these, you know, so there are structural things that could be looked at. You know, we need more foreign investment into the country. But you're right, there does need to be a big plan. There has been low growth for a long, long time in this country. It's very difficult just to pull a lever. I think leaving the EU has not helped either.
Well, I want to come back to that, but because I know you were both Remainers, so I'm sure you'd be very keen to back Wes Streeting's plan. But I'll come back to that in a second. But you're very helpful on defence and the plan to cut welfare. That would help the government out no end, you said. So can you give them some advice on how to get growth then? Well,
I think these things are quite easy to say with the benefit of hindsight, you know, and I've been out of Downing Street for a couple of years now. And looking back, I would say that the one thing that every chancellor should be told the moment they walk through the door is sorting out the problems of economic growth is actually quite straightforward. It's not easy, but it's quite clear what needs to be done. There's quite a big consensus amongst economists as to what needs to happen. We've been talking about some of them this evening. But nearly every single one will take 5 years before it shows in the figures.
Yeah, it's too late already.
And so you have to really go about it with a lot of vigour very early on. Otherwise, it gets in the sort of... Because, you know, things like planning reform, you're obviously not going to see increased investment from changing the planning rules for several years. But there's a political cost. And the only time that you're going to be able to deal with the political cost is very early on in someone's tenure. Now, there is one thing that I think does show in the numbers much more quickly. And this is what, you know, if Rachel Reeves were ever to ask me, this is what I would say to her. Of all those...
You do still chat, don't you?
We do chat, but I wouldn't say it's you know, advice on, you know, what to put in a budget or anything like that. But the one thing I think does have an almost immediate impact is bringing down energy prices. So I would really, and I think you can do this in a way that's perfectly compatible with climate change responsibilities, but, you know, the madness, for example, of the fact that we have the world's 4 biggest offshore wind farms, and yet we have to switch them off for half of the electricity that they generate because the national grid can't take the capacity.
You can't speed that up. I mean, they are investing in...
Well, those kind of things, also what Spain has done, which is decoupling its energy prices from international gas prices, those kinds of things actually could have a big difference, a big impact in, you know, a couple of years, not quite so long.
OK, so what about Ayesha's point about the EU? That hasn't helped growth. You know, you argued against it, but where's Streeting to put it back on the table?
Do you know, we were having such a lovely evening and someone has brought up Brexit and I'm worried about where we're going to go from here.
Well, you both agree, though, so, you know, it'll be harmonious.
I probably do have a different view. I don't buy the argument that the problems we face are really down to Brexit. I think if you look at our growth compared to France, Germany, Italy, Spain, it's been pretty similar.
Fastest growth in the G7, the government said last week, sorry. Yeah,
in some ways, sometimes when you take that number, you can say we're even growing faster than them. But I don't think, you know, the people who say we've lost 4 to 8% of our GDP because of Brexit, that would have meant us growing at the same rate as America since Brexit. And I just don't think...
So you're a Brexiteer now?
I don't think this is a debate we want to have again. Right. I really don't. I think we've, you know, we can find a way to flourish outside the EU. We've just got to stick with it. And by the way, it just relates. I'll say one thing on this, which relates to our earlier discussion. You know, Brexit was a messy divorce initiated by us, left a lot of bruised feelings in the EU. But I think since Ukraine, given the support that we have given Ukraine, which has been more than any other European country in terms of military support, I think the EU have seen that we are good Europeans, and that has helped. I think that has helped mend some fences.
Do you want to put this back on the table? Do you think Wes was right to raise it?
I mean, I've got a slightly different view. I mean, I think Brexit has damaged the economy, along with other things. But I think it has been a significant contributing factor. The amount of friction there is with trade, that's just undeniable now. In terms of whether I think it should be the #1 issue, probably not right now, but I would say if you speak to a lot of the public, they themselves are coming to the view that this hasn't been this huge banging success. I don't think anybody wants to relitigate the whole thing, but certainly if you look at the polling, if you look at the conversations that people have, it hasn't brought all these amazing Brexit benefits. Immigration has gone up, you know, our standards of living has not gone up. And I think, you know, going on holiday is more difficult now. So I think people are not stupid. They can see. But in terms of going back to the growth question, something that you mentioned, which I think is really, really important, investing in infrastructure is really important in terms of getting growth. And we have starved our country of proper infrastructure,
we're going to talk about
energy, all of those
later,
things. Yeah.
So we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. Thanks very much for now. And, of course, the latest political news will feature heavily on our late-night programme, The Wrap, tonight from 10 p.m. Here to discuss all of today's big stories and the best of tomorrow's papers will be the journalist and broadcaster Sonia Soda and the political commentator Adam Bolton. Well, cost blowouts and delays are hardly new for government projects, but £70 billion with a B and 13 years is certainly noteworthy. That was today's announcement about the HS2 high-speed rail project. The first trains from London Euston now won't run before 2040. It'll cost up to £103 billion and will be slower than first promised. Sky's business and economics correspondent Paul Kelso reports.
This particular size and shape, we call it the caterpillar box.
Wow, that is an enormous hole.
One conveyor belt, whole length.
5.5k long, 6k long. Yeah.
7k by the time it gets to there.
The government says HS2 is now going to cost more than £100 billion. Do you want to know how you spend that much money on a railway? Let's go and have a look and find out. Thank you. This is the Victoria Road crossover box. It's at the heart of a 13-kilometre tunnel under West London. That way is Birmingham. This way is Euston, and eventually HS2 trains will fly over points here in either direction. Now, they were supposed to be heading through these tunnels by Christmas this year. Now it won't be for another decade at the earliest, and they won't get to Euston until possibly the 2040s. Meanwhile, the budget has soared, and the only thing slowing down is the trains. Now, this is unquestionably monumental construction, but how has it come to be, in the eyes of so many, a monumental waste of money? HS2 was originally supposed to cost £33 billion. So far, £43 billion has been spent. The government now says it could cost more than £100 billion. That will make it the most expensive high-speed railway line on Earth, and it won't even go to its original destination. It was meant to run to both Manchester and Leeds, but those have both been cut back because of cost, leaving just a single line to Birmingham. It will first stop at Old Oak Common in this direction before eventually a tunnel will take it all the way to Euston in central London, possibly as late as 2043. These tunnels were built yard by yard with layer upon layer of concrete. The problem with HS2 is less the concrete than the fact, in the jargon, it was gold-plated, designed to the highest specification for the world's fastest trains. That meant not cutting corners, but eliminating them and going in straight lines. Well, that costs more money. The risks of the project weren't properly understood. Designs kept changing, and there was constant political pressure. And eventually, HS2 Limited, contractors and the government lost control.
I can confirm today that it could cost almost as much to cancel the line as it would to finish it, while delivering none of the benefits.
So what is this government going to do about it? Well, they won't be cancelling HS2. Putting things back as they were, well, that would cost as much as has been spent already. The trains will be slowed down to 320 kilometres an hour, the same as a Japanese bullet train. That saves a couple of £1 billion. Some back office roles are being cut, and the people who delivered the Elizabeth line are now in charge. There's no question, when this is eventually finished, it will be a world-class railway. But the journey to get here, well, that's been a national embarrassment, and fixing that matters. From energy to data centres, from airports to our water network, Britain needs infrastructure projects that work. If HS2's got a legacy, it might be a very, very expensive lesson in how and how not to do it.
Well, let's bring in Jeremy and Ayesha. Ayesha, a national embarrassment was the phrase Paul used. It's true, isn't it?
Totally, and it kind of just loops into what we were talking about earlier, and Paul summed it up brilliantly and very eloquently at the end, whether it's nuclear power stations, whether it's, you know, runways at Heathrow or these lines. You know, why are we so bad at building in this country? I feel like we've lost our kind of institutional confidence in terms of how to do big infrastructure projects. And it is embarrassing. You go all over the world and you see these incredible infrastructure projects and you think, why can't we do that here?
Well, what's your answer to that question?
Well, I think actually we should be a bit glass half full. I'm going to be controversial, stick my neck out here. Yeah, look, this started in 2009 under Andrew Adonis. It has actually survived successive governments. It survived massive shortages of money in the Treasury. And it's still going ahead, and we're not. That is because we've never built. We have not been good at building infrastructure. We are now learning, and the main lesson here, I think,
we're slow learners, though.
Well, I think the main. Well, let's learn those lessons though, because we need more of this infrastructure. We need more nuclear power stations. I think the main problem is judicial review. It is so easy to stop planning projects in their tracks, if it's a nuclear power station, if it's a railway, whatever it is, because campaigners can instigate judicial reviews. It slows the whole thing right down. I think that
so what do you do about that?
Well, what I'd say is when Parliament decides it wants to do something, elected representatives, when the Treasury finds the money to do it, then I think there should be a 2-year limit to all challenges to a project. And then we should get on with it, because I think the worst.
I think to be fair, this government has introduced reforms of the planning system to try and make it easier. But picking up on something you said earlier about the short-termism of politics, I mean, we used to have 5-year terms. It now feels we're having 2-year terms with prime ministers. How do we get these decisions to carry through when there is such a churn and we're cycling through so many sort of premiers and top ministers?
Sure. I mean, on this project, we had 7 transport secretaries in 10 years. That can't have helped in terms of the management of the project. But I think the bigger thing is...
Do you think this stuff should be outsourced and taken away from government control?
No, I don't. I would say, actually, interestingly, compared to when I became an MP 20 years ago, there is a consensus that we should have this infrastructure. It used to be before, lots of people said, no, we don't need to have this infrastructure. We now want to do it. Let's learn how to do it properly.
Well, it's fascinating hearing that one. Again, it's another subject we could discuss further, and I'm sure we will. But now to a story we've been following after our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, became the first international journalist to visit the scene of a strike on a school in Iran, in which 120 children were killed on the first day of the war. Despite an initial finding that it carried out the attack, America is still to admit responsibility. Take a look.
The missiles struck in the middle of the morning when the school was full of children, causing enormous loss of life. Staff at the school had already realised that Iran was under attack that morning and called parents to take their children home. Most of them didn't get here in time. Survivors say that most of the children, the girls on the upper floor of the school, were moved to that end of the building to a prayer room for their safety. When the missiles struck, they killed many children and teachers on impact, but they also tragically collapsed completely that end of the school, trapping and killing many more.
Well, US Admiral Brad Cooper, head of US Central Command, testified before Congress about this today. He then spoke to our US correspondent Mark Stone, who joins us now. Mark, this was a really powerful report from Dom, wasn't it?
Hi, Cathy. It was, and very rare to get up close to that school, to get the access. Dom and his team have been there for a few days, and as you say, they are the first international journalists to make it there. It's a long time since that bombing happened, February the 28th, the first day of Donald Trump's war in Iran. And since then, there has been nothing, really, from the Pentagon or from the White House. There was an initial inquiry. Results of that came out, but that was 2 months ago, incidentally, that those results came out, which suggested that perhaps the Pentagon and the US was responsible, but the Trump administration never attached itself to that and has never commented. Admiral Brad Cooper is the, as you say, the commander of CENTCOM. He is the man who is prosecuting this war. He is in charge of this war in Iran, every bit of it. And he has been on Capitol Hill last week and again today. He hasn't answered any questions from journalists, but we got up close to him as he left the hearing today.
Admiral Mark Stone from Sky News. Can you explain why you cannot reveal what happened in Manab?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good.
Investigation's ongoing.
For how long can you hide behind an investigation is ongoing, sir? We have a team in Manab right now. They have seen what happened. They have seen no evidence of a Iranian missile base there. For how long can you hide behind an investigation is happening, sir? When will the investigation conclude? Admiral, can you tell us when the investigation will conclude? Can you say anything to the families who died in Manab, sir?
Nothing then from the Admiral. I should say that an hour before that, Cathy, when he was giving evidence, he did reveal something new. He claimed that the reason for the delay in terms of releasing the investigation had something to do with the fact, his claim, that there was an Iranian missile site near or very near that school. Now, Dom and his team have been reporting from there. They were telling us earlier on that they have seen no evidence of that being the case, either at the school or anywhere near the school. But we await the results of this investigation. But for now, they continue to hide behind the phrase that has been repeated to us again and again. We can't comment because there is an investigation ongoing.
Mark, you tried your best with that doorstep. Thanks very much. Well, let's return to defence and that speech this evening by the Defence Secretary John Healey. Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes has now managed to escape and joins me now. Deborah, there was an announcement, but it wasn't the announcement, of course, about the defence investment plan. What did you hear?
Well, he came out and said that it's coming soon, I promise. I did actually push him on behalf of every single journalist, MP and member of the defence industry that has been hassling him since the autumn for a date for when that potential plan might be. Would it be before the NATO summit in July? Will it even be next month? He just kept on sticking to the line that it would come soon, and he did say that he wishes, like everybody else, that it hadn't been delayed, so clearly a bit of frustration there. And he also had a stark warning for colleagues like Andy Burnham, Wes Streeting, even his own Armed Forces Minister, Al Khan, who've all been talked about as potentially eyeing the Prime Minister's job, saying that the last 10, 12 days have been very, very tough, and also saying that Labour needs to get serious. They mustn't throw away the power that they won when they won the election, and really giving this rallying cry to focus on the business of government, saying that the last few days have been a distraction, not just for him in defence, but across the board. And also then having a dig at people that perhaps like photo opportunities. He says in particular that he doesn't really like people that, or he doesn't really sort of approve of those that are focused on sort of PR stunts and photo opportunities. Again, he didn't name names, but clearly we all know that a number of other colleagues have not been very camera shy of lately.
You could say that again. I wonder who you're thinking of. Debs, thanks very much for that. Well, let's bring in Jeremy and Ayesha now. Ayesha, photo ops. I mean, you know, the Defence Minister, Al Khan, who may or may not be a leadership contender, he likes the odd photo op, doesn't he?
He certainly
and he does it very well.
It's very interesting because Al Khan is somebody that is not a household name at all, like politically, but has this quite big following. You know, when you talk about potential leadership candidates, certainly on my Times radio show, his name will just, you know, so many listeners will be like, oh, what about Al Khan? He's got quite high, you know, a lot of people think he's as I said, he could be our new Paddy Ashdown, you know, because the people love a kind of military sort of man. Yeah. But look, some very serious points.
He's fought his way out of a cave. I mean, he's got a very distinguished record, hasn't he?
Apparently, yes. Yes, I mean, I believe completely. I mean, he looks like he
says he
looks like he could like mend a tank with a sock. I mean,
have you seen his pull-ups?
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Have you seen his pull-ups?
I have not.
Can
no,
you do
I'm missing out. No, well,
that's why you didn't win the Tory leadership.
Exactly.
You can't
I can do press-ups, but not pull-ups.
You do go for a run, though.
I do go for a run. Yes.
What about the shorts?
Now
listen, have you got shorts as short as Andy Burnham?
I have got shorts, maybe not quite as short as Andy's. Men
running for leadership and running in their own
Well,
shorts.
you know, yeah, exactly.
Sorry,
I mean, I'm a profession of...
Just tell Cathy how you were described when someone said you were more...
Someone said that, you know, Andy Burnham was more Boris Johnson than Jeremy Hunt, which I think was probably a compliment to me.
Ouch!
But anyway, listen, I'm going to stick my neck out on this defence investment plan. Yeah, I think it's going to come out this month, and I think it'll come out on June the 19th or June the 20th. Next month. Yeah, I think it'll come out.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I wonder why. It's something we're not supposed to be talking about on this evening show. But I think that we're going to see it. And I also think that it's coming ahead of the NATO summit, and that is a moment of danger because that's... I remember, as Foreign Secretary, 3 days into the job, I went to the infamous NATO summit in Brussels where Trump had a stand-up row with Angela Merkel and nearly pulled America out of NATO on the spot. And I think all the European countries will be looking at this as a moment of danger because it's such a platform for Donald Trump. Yeah. He knows the eyes of the world will be on him and you know, he's also very angry. So,
and in that context, Labour at war with itself, you know, rather than wondering about, you know, defending us against war from Russia, for example,
well, look,
it's been troubling.
It's been suboptimal, I would say. But whatever happens in terms of all the kind of leadership machinations, we still have to put country before party. And if this investment plan comes out, then that is the right thing to do, regardless of what's happening behind the scenes. That's
but we
the right
don't know whether the next Prime Minister will get behind
it.
But
I think whoever, if there is a change of Prime Minister, I think whoever comes in will have to be behind it. And that will be a question they will get really pressed on in terms of trying to get that job.
But I come back to the note left to, the note left by Liam Byrne, Labour Minister, when the coalition government came in. I'm afraid there is no money left. Very short comment on that.
Yes, well, as we heard earlier, we're going to have to find where that money is going to come from. But It doesn't necessarily have to be announced at the same time. It's the budget that's the moment when you're going to have to explain where that money comes from. So they may buy themselves some time.
Well, it's been great chatting to you both. Thank you very much. I mean, you brought us back from the shorts discussion, so thank you particularly for that. That is nearly all for tonight, but we're going to leave you with this. These are pictures from a so-called de-extinction firm who has hatched its first chicks from an entirely artificial egg. Colossal Biosciences claim the technology could be used to resurrect a now extinct species, a la Jurassic Park. Other scientists have said that there is still a long way to go before that can be done, and it may never be possible, unless life finds a way. We're back tomorrow at 7 p.m. Bye for now. Thanks for watching.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... Hi, darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?